All right, class, I wanted to go over a little bit of the highlights for this chapter regarding forecasting the production requirements and the production and serving controls. I do expect that this should not be your only reference to the chapter, that you will actually be reading the entire chapter and going over all the PowerPoints. But let me highlight a few of the important things. First of all, the forecasting of production requirements. This is required because we analyze the past sales history. The production planning is important because it involves the preparing, the cooking, and the holding of all of the foods. It's an important element in our cost control, and it's very necessary that it's managed by the staff. The first step that we should look at for the forecasting of these requirements is to determine the percentage of guests ordering each menu item. This is kind of common sense when you think about it. If you have a whole bunch of maybe 10 menu items and you want to know how much to order and prepare for the upcoming months, you would look at your past sales and see how many of those items were ordered on average. So that's pretty much what this slide is telling you, to look at the sales history for each menu item sold during each meal period for each day and each week. You're going to calculate the total number of guests served if you look at the total menu items sold divided by the percentage of guests ordering the item. If you need to estimate required servings, you're going to use those forecasts based on the past. So you're going to take the estimated guests, multiply it by the percentage of guests ordering each item, and that will give you your estimated servings. So let's do a few of these. In your textbook for this chapter, problem 2 gives you a little layout of chicken, beef stew, pork chops, vegetarian dinner, veal cutlets, and filet mignon. This isn't a question that you need to have for the homework, but I think it's important that we go over it. In this problem, they have the total sales by portion. So we know 175 people ordered chicken, 137 people ordered beef, 112 pork, etc. And the question wants us to calculate the percentage of each guest ordering each item. I think it actually wants us to do a forecast. No, it just wants to, well, for our purposes, we're going to look at the percentage of each guest ordering each item. We should look at these numbers here. Put this PowerPoint on pause and calculate on your own what the percentage of each guest ordering chicken might be. All right, the percentage of guests ordering chicken would have been 24.6%. The percentage ordering beef were 19.2%, and so on. You see how we got this? We added all of the total items that were ordered, 175 plus 137 plus 112 plus 62 plus 98 plus 128, for a total of 712 items. To calculate the amount of chicken ordered, we divide 175 divided by 712, and we should get 24.6%. To double check our answer, we would add the percentages of all of these items and hope that we come up to 100. If we don't, we made a mistake and we need to go back. Okay, so why is that useful? Here we have these great percentages, so what? Well, let's say that we anticipate instead of 712 guests, we anticipate 1,000. Maybe we have a special event or it's a popular weekend. So knowing our past sales history, how many portions of chicken might we expect to serve? These were our original percentages, so put me on pause, and I want you to calculate how many guests you would expect, or how many portions of chicken you would expect to serve if we now anticipate 1,000 guests. The answer is 246 portions. This should be pretty easy because we take 24.6%, or 0.246, times 1,000. And that would give us 246 portions. Put it on pause and work through beef, pork, and vegetarian menus and so on. This should be your answers. These should be your answers. Beef should be 192 portions, pork chops 157 portions, vegetarian 87 portions, and again we add these all up and we equal the 1,000 portions. So, for example, we take the veal 98 times 0.138 equals 138 portions, because 138 portions is that 13.8% of the total 1,000 portions. So now take these numbers and let's make it a little bit different. What if we expected a decrease of 500 guests? So now we expect 500 guests to be ordering, and our percentages were based on 712. So how many portions of each item would be served? And you can see where this could be important from a control perspective. This is inventory that you're pulling out. It's inventory that's exposed. It's the amount of inventory that you order. And if you're over or under ordering, you can either be underprepared or you could be wasting extra food. So put this on pause and calculate how many portions of chicken you think would be served if we now expect 500 guests, and we know that chicken is usually 24.6% of our orders. This should be what you come up with. Now, due to rounding, you know you can't serve a half a portion, right? So if when you calculate these, if you come up with I don't remember which ones were rounded, but if you came up with, for example, 79.23 or 67, you have to, or 78.23 and 78.27, you have to round it up to 79. So due to rounding, when you get down to the bottom, you have 501 guests. But we would expect that the chicken would serve 123 customers, because 24.6% of 500 guests is 123. To figure out the beef stew, we took 500 guests times 0.192, and that would be equal to 96. The pork is 500 times 0.157 for 79 guests. Vegetarian, 500 times 0.087 equals 44, and so on and so forth. So this works really well if we have a consistent amount of sales that don't fluctuate a lot. But one of the other ways that we can look at forecasting is a time series forecasting. And time series forecasting gives a weight factor based on the prior week's sales, and it gives a bigger weight to the more recent sales. So this could be helpful if you are experiencing any sort of subtle volatility in the market, if you experience some effects of the recession or whatnot. Last week's sales will be weighted 6 times the amount of 6 weeks prior. This is important because there's a heavy emphasis on the data based on the recent trends. So if you see here on the slide, if these were our sales for last week were 250, prior week was 248, then it was 230, then 265, then 210 and 225, we are establishing an upward trend. And because of that, we would like to weight that 250 is going to be represent 6 times, 248 is 5 times, and we're paying less attention to 6 weeks ago at 225. So to calculate any sort of time series forecasting, you multiply it by the weighting factor, and you can see that below. 250 times 6 plus 248 times 5 plus 230 times 4, and so on. You add up all of those numbers, 1500 plus 1240 plus 920 plus 795 plus 420 plus 225, and you have 5010. And then you're going to average that out based on that weighted factor. Do you see that? 6 plus 5 plus 4. And so on. So you have 5,100 divided by 21. And the weighted factor for time series forecasting is 242 items. 242.8. Now that would be different than if you averaged the 250 and so on in a traditional method. Time series forecasting can be a very valuable tool. I'll leave it to you to decide whether it would be valuable in a seasonal market or not. The other thing I wanted to go over were food cost control procedures. Things that we should be aware of. Let me find my page. For the production costs, if we need to require a standard cost control tools be used consistently. Well, this should be a theme that you're pretty familiar with through the course, that consistency is key for any cost control or anything that involves reports and cost control in a restaurant. You also want to issue foods only in the amounts that are needed to meet production requirements forecasted on the basis of past sales data, adjusted by current factors, including special events. We want to train our staff efficiently and make sure that they all understand the importance of cost control. We need to minimize food waste. Remember, we talked a lot about how meat was trimmed, how we calculated our weight proportion, proportion costs, and how if it wasn't trimmed properly, our whole cost control method defaults early on. We want to use property quality items. We need to monitor employee eating and drinking practices, even though we may compensate them with a meal if they're snagging a little roll of bread here or there. Not only is it unsanitary and violates some health rules, but it also affects our cost control. It's important to put unused items back in storage promptly. I think some of those videos from last week with Chef Ramsay put that to light, and make sure they're put back in appropriate levels of storage. We need to require management approval before discarding items. Sometimes employees will be a little ambitious in regarding items. This applies to spoiled items in storage as well as items that have been improperly prepared. We want to match the issue and production records with sales records. We need to resolve bottlenecks during a busy period. We have a case study that involves bottlenecks. We really need to look for those periods that come up and ask the employees if they have any insight. They very often do, and it could be very valuable. I'm going to touch a little bit on beverage cost control procedures. Remember, this is a lot about the video from our first week where we met that man who had the beer. I don't remember, that was up north somewhere. That's in Module 1 if you want to watch it again. But that beer was measured to exact measurements, and they had very little waste, and it made a huge difference in cost control. Other things such as observe and supervise staff, lock your bar inventories when they're not in use, match beverages used with the revenue generated, and hold the bartender responsible for cash and behind the bar inventory. Remember, we did spend quite a bit of time talking about inventory. Onu watched that other inventory video where they tabbed all the inventory for the bar. We'll get into a little bit more of preventing theft and whatnot in the second half of the course. I wanted to get you set up a little bit with your homework and make sure we were all clear on the homework help. So on page 301, the only problem you have to submit this time is problem 1. What is the percentage of total items for each menu item averaged over the past 5 Fridays? So this is exactly what we're talking about. This is not a weighted, this is just a strict average. And this person needs to know this because they're trying to forecast how much they should expect for the future. So your first step in doing this, if you go to page 301 and look at the chart there, they have chicken, pork, prime rib, lobster, and veal. And they have 5 weeks of sales. So it's pretty easy to take step 1, how much chicken was sold in the past 5 Fridays. You add up week 1 plus week 2 plus week 3 plus week 4 plus week 5, and you should have the total number of items sold. And you're going to divide the number of chicken items sold by the total number of items sold. So you'll need to add up all the pork, prime rib, etc. Give you a little hint here. We sold 335 pieces of chicken, or portions of chicken. We sold, oops, there's a little comma problem there. We sold 1,762 items. I'll leave it to you to add that up, but it should not have an extra little one in there. It's 1,762. And then we're going to divide the chicken sold divided by our total number of items sold. So chicken represents 19% of the total items sold. So make sure you can calculate that correctly, and then you should be able to successfully calculate the rest of them. Remember, you should add up those percentages and they should equal 100. In the second part of the problem, the manager wants to remove the outliers from the average. This would be an alternative way to the weighted method. He felt that week 2 and week 5 didn't really were not fair representations, and if you look at those numbers you can see that they are extremely high and extremely low. So he felt that week 1, 3, and 4 were a lot more valuable to predict future entrees. So basically you're going to do the same thing you did in part A, but this time you're going to only use week 1, 2, and 3 To determine the average, obviously, we're going to divide it by 3 weeks. I hope that helps you a little bit. Please take some time to go over the service control factors, and also I would encourage you to use the practice questions for the midterm, and it's an optional quiz. It doesn't count for or against you, it's just as a study tool. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me, and have a